Hey everybody, today I'm going to be reviewing Mulholland Drive. This came out in the year 2001. It was written and directed by the highly imaginative, highly bizarre David Lynch. By the time this film was being made, Lynch had already established himself as one of the great auteur cult directors of his generation. He made quite a few groundbreaking, very controversial films like Eraserhead, Blue Velvet, of course. He changed the medium of television when he made Twin Peaks. He loves to tap into very uncomfortable, very surrealistic, macabre areas of the subconscious while also adding his own very distinct, very quirky brand of humor. If you look at films like Blue Velvet and of course TV shows like Twin Peaks, you see a consistency in the look of the film and that he likes to have a very kind of glossy, doo-wop, 1950s Hollywood-inspired exterior. He does this so that it's quite jarring when he starts to twist all of these romanticized ideals into things that are very terrifying. He's using the medium of film to explore the darkness of the human psyche, and he does this by examining film and performance and the idea of how that feeds into illusion and manipulation. And this gives him the ability to really dabble in a lot of very kind of psychedelic and very surrealistic themes. I think that you definitely saw hints of it in Blue Velvet, more so in a film like, in a show like Twin Peaks, but he took those hints and he completely fleshed them out in Mulholland Drive. I think that this is probably Lynch's most personal work, and it's definitely his most daring, his most experimental, up to that point at least. And for me, it's one of my favorite movies of all time. Mulholland Drive is like a combination of Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo and Ingmar Bergman's Persona. It's one long unmasking of the human psyche, and he's taking the Hollywood illusion and the idea that brainwashes so many people in terms of this perfect world, and he's kind of warping it, turning it in on itself. He wants to explore how fucked up the mind is and how morally we are quite distorted in terms of what we think we want. I guess I should get into the basic premise of the plot, but that's not really the point of the film at all. You're not supposed to really take the plot very seriously, I think, on just a very superficial level. It starts off as this very kind of seemingly stereotypical neo-noir inspired film that slowly unravels as it reveals more truth. And it starts off with a woman who is in a car crash, big attention grabber. She receives a concussion in the car crash that gives her amnesia, so she doesn't know who she is or why she was in this crash, anything like that. And she flees the scene of the accident and she ends up on Mulholland Drive. There she meets an aspiring young actress played brilliantly by Naomi Watts. She is in Los Angeles to visit her aunt and also to go on an audition because she has these great aspirations of becoming this famous actress, this big movie star. Betty befriends this nameless woman from the car crash who eventually calls herself Rita. They slowly try to solve the mystery behind the car crash and they try to figure out the identity of who Rita really is. That's the first half of the film, but that's barely scratching the surface of what the film is capable of and certainly what the film is really about. And it's extremely deceptive if you just read the premise by itself. One of the reasons I've chosen not to review this film for so long is because it's just really, really hard to explain. It's hard to review without going into major spoiler territory. So if you have not seen the film, stop watching this review right now, go watch it, then come back and see what I have to say about it. The first half of the film reminds me so much of Vertigo, especially since I watched both films very recently, in that it entices you into this story that is obviously a very manipulative device. It's precisely pulling the strings of your emotions so intently in the way that most average Hollywood films do. Beyond that, the film becomes very disorienting in that the plot just becomes completely jumbled. It's almost incoherent and it kind of turns into this very nightmarish, very sensory experience. Rarely have I ever seen a film analyzed to death like I have this one. And honestly, I think there's good reason for it because this film is so mysterious in terms of the way it's made, and also because David Lynch is famous for being very taciturn when it comes to talking about the themes of his films. Everything from props, numbers that are dialed on the phone that you see later on in the film, consistency in terms of colors popping up at certain points. Every word, every symbol has just been contemplated ever since, and it's quite extraordinary. If you look up mulhollanddrive.net, that is amazing to see all of the fan theories that people have speculated about. What's most clear is that Lynch, whether it's conscious or not, he's making a blatant commentary on Hollywood ideals versus the reality. Many people see the film as just a long dream, and it's Naomi Watts' dream. And it begins in this very naive idea of how she maybe wanted Hollywood to be when she first got there, when she was this wide-eyed, innocent girl. She wanted Hollywood to be what she thought it was, what she saw in the movie. She wanted it to be glamorous and alluring, full of intrigue. Betty, in the beginning of the film, starts off as this very sunny, bubbly, very optimistic kind of Doris Day character that you might have seen in like a 1950s MGM musical or something like that. But as the dream goes on, it is revealed that this glossy exterior that she wanted is not her reality. In truth, she's this very unhappy actress who has just been beaten down over and over again, betrayed by the movie business. She's been betrayed by her lover. That shock of realization that Hollywood and life is not what she thought it would be fundamentally destroys her. And as the dream or the story, whatever, as it progresses, even though it gets more difficult to understand as it goes along, ironically, you see more of who she is. You see her true nature and her pain right up until the moment that she supposedly commits suicide at the end. There's a lot of in-jokes and a lot of really strange humor that is classic David Lynch if you've seen anything else that he's done, and it makes the film feel very much as if it's a satire of Hollywood, and in many ways it is. The bland characters, the bad acting, the very faux kind of colors and the aesthetic of the picture. But the reason why I think that this particular use of satire works maybe better than others, at least for him, is that there's a certain scene in the film where he's digging deeper into the idea of what that satire means, and that is the audition scene where Betty goes on her first audition. Up until that point, we've just seen her as this very perky, innocent, almost Barbie doll-like character. You don't see any substance in her character, and you don't see any substance in any of the characters up to that point. And of course, that is very much intentional. But when she gets into the audition and she starts acting, ironically, that's when there is a shift, and all of a sudden things become very visceral and seemingly very real. And it's almost as if it's coming from a very different movie. It's in a very hypnotic moment. Not only do I think it's powerful because you're seeing maybe hints of what the real Betty might be like, but it's also allowing us to see the irony of true acting, that the idea of acting, performance, can often be veering into territory that is actually true art. Sometimes acting and performance can be more powerful and more deep than actual reality because it's evoking those emotions that we hold underneath the surface and bringing them forward. It's digging beneath that reality, and that's ultimately where dreams come from. Lynch in that moment is very aware of the idea of film being an illusion, and he realizes that film is a double-edged sword in many ways because yes, it is manipulative, but when it's used correctly, it can have this artistic intention behind it that often touches on themes that you just can't achieve without that performance, without that manipulation attached to it. He knows he's the director. He is the mastermind behind the illusion. He is the guy behind the curtain. But Naomi Watts also, in a way, could be seen as the director of the movie or the mastermind behind the illusion because this is her dream. In a way, she's directing her own movie. She's using people from her real life, or presumably from her real life, and casting them as characters in a story that she is making up. Both Lynch and Naomi Watts' character, in a way, merge when you think about it. They both represent us. They represent the unconscious mind, how all of these symbols, all of these things that we imagine in our dreams are often metaphors for our most vulnerable feelings that we bury. If there's one scene that I think encapsulates the entire Lynch canon and what he's about as a creator, it would be the Club Silencio scene, which I think is one of the greatest scenes in anything. It's certainly one that really does get to the heart of what movies are and their intent. That scene is planted at the perfect moment in the film, right at the halfway point before the plot starts to unravel and become very incoherent. It's perfect timing because it's that turning point into this new method of storytelling that Lynch begins to utilize. Obviously, if you've seen the film, you know that Rita becomes a different character entirely in the second half. Rita becomes Camila, and then you have Betty, who becomes Diane. Naomi Watts has said in quite a few interviews that she sees Diane as the real person that is creating Betty, and Betty is the figment of her imagination. But I kind of see it in a different way, because perhaps this dream or this stream of consciousness, whatever you want to call it, maybe none of it is real. I mean, really, when you think about it, they're all characters. Betty and Diane are characters. All of them are figments of someone's imagination. The way I see it, of course, is just my own interpretation. I am certainly open to all kinds of other ones, but just for me, I like to think of Camila, Rita, Diane, and Betty all as the same person. These four characters, and I guess you could argue many of the other characters as well, represent all of these different dimensions of the person, the way he or she became who they wanted to be, their flaws, their strengths. It's all exhibited in these characters that are basically archetypes standing for a collective consciousness. And really, that's where characters come from in stories. They all are supposed to represent parts of human emotion, of the human psychosis. So you could say that Betty is actually Diane, or, you know, whatever. And again, it's up to so many interpretations, and many people are going to view it the way that they want to view it. But I think that that's what's so brilliant about the film, because really, in the big scheme of things, it doesn't matter. This movie is extremely ambiguous without being so completely obscure that it completely loses its audience and it loses the point of what it's trying to convey. This is a film that is very aware of its conceits, and it falls victim to those conceits at some points, and then it also rises above them at others. To me, this film is almost like looking at a diamond. You know, when you look at a diamond, as you turn and the light hits it in certain ways, new colors pop up that you hadn't seen before. Every time you look at it, it's like you're seeing something new and something more special and more beautiful than you did before. And that's how I feel about this film, because I've seen it many, many, many times, and yet I'm still, to this day, trying to figure out what I think about it, what certain archetypes, what certain symbols and characters mean to me, and how they shift as I grow older. And I think the reason why it shifts so often and feels so complex is because it is tied to the complexity of human feelings and how they weave together and make up a human life right up until our very last breath. If you've seen the film and you found it too difficult to understand, I completely get that, because when I first saw this movie, I think I was like 17 or something, I knew that I had seen something special, but I had no idea what it was. And it's not until you see it multiple times that it really starts to resonate with you, I think, and you start to find truth and more of those personal themes that are beneath it. But it really means something to me, and it is, as I said, one of my very, very, very favorite movies of all time. And that is my review. Thank you all for listening. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter, the link is below, and you can also like my Facebook page and the link below that one. Catch you next time.